Hey everybody, this is Alan Liska from Green Archer Comics, and today we are going to talk about the time the Seven Soldiers of Victory disappeared. Specifically, we're talking about Justice League of America issues 100 through 102, published starting in August of 1972. It's a really interesting story, and it's a reminder of even in the 1970s the comic book companies were pulling on these old characters, drawing them back, and trying to relive that nostalgia, which is interesting because generally the Seven Soldiers of Victory were there because they really didn't have a home anywhere else. They weren't part of the Justice League or Justice Society or any of the other team ups that were happening at the time. So they were kind of orphan characters that they tried to force into a team. Mort Meskin and Mort Weisinger did. And unfortunately, it didn't work too well. They had 14 issues, and I think the issues are really good in leading comics, but ultimately they were kind of forgotten and still are today, and we're in this particular set of issues. So let's get into it. But before we do, I want to remind you that we have a unrealistic, quixotic goal that we are trying to beat Diamond Comics in terms of the number of YouTube subscribers. They're at around 4,200. We're at 3,200, and we really want to beat them by the end of the year. And if we do, we will double our annual donation to the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. So I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe and help us on this damn full idealistic crusade. Thank you very much, and let's get to the story. As I said, the Seven Soldiers of Victory first appeared in Leading Comics #1 in 1941, created by Mort Weisinger and Mort Meskin, and they consisted of the Vigilante, Crimson Avenger, Green Arrow and Speedy, Shining Knight, the Star-Spangled Kid, and Stripesy. The Crimson Avenger also had a sidekick, Wing, but he never counted as one of the Seven Soldiers. He was, if you will, the eighth soldier. They ran for 14 issues in Leading Comics, but it just was never as popular as the Justice League and some of the others. None of the characters generally were as popular. So when DC was doing the 100th issue of the Justice League, they needed something big. And they normally would do, for something like this, they would do a Justice League, Justice Society team up, but they wanted to add in the Seven Soldiers. I think it's interesting because back then it would have been a lot more difficult to find these old comics. Most of them were thrown away and people hadn't thought about it, but they did, and they were able to kind of relive and retell those stories. It helped that a lot of those editors and writers were still alive and maybe had copies of them. So the Justice League is celebrating their 100th meeting. Everybody's meeting together except for Martian Manhunter, who's rebuilding Mars, and a couple of others. But we see the Atom, we see Zatanna show up, Hawkman's there, etc. And they've got a big old cake in order to celebrate that they've had 100 meetings like this. Interestingly, because it is the 1970s, the three women are obligated to cut the cake. So Black Canary, Zatanna, and Diana Prince, who temporarily doesn't have her powers. However, they fail because suddenly they're all whisked away to Justice Society headquarters, and Elongated Man is very confused because he hasn't gone through this before, but everybody else knows what's happening. And we also get an introduction to the Justice Society for people who don't know, because, again, there was no internet or anything, so you might have needed a refresher. And Dr. Fate tells the Justice League that the Earth is being crushed by a giant hand, and they need the Justice League's help to stop them. So they reach out to the Oracle, and the Oracle tells them about the Seven Soldiers of Victory, and how they were destroyed by Nebula Man, which is one of the last episodes of Leading Comics and the Seven Soldiers of Victory. And there's a lot of confusion because nobody knows who the Seven Soldiers of Victory are. They're very confused by this. And you'd think especially Green Arrow would be confused since he's one of the seven soldiers, but he seems to take it pretty well. Kind of weird. You'd think he'd need some therapy after that, but apparently not. And then we get the first story about the hand. And the hand is the first story in Leading Comics #1 that brings the seven soldiers together, where the hand comes up with this diabolical plot, and he has to get together all of these different villains to carry out different crimes, and the independent heroes stop them and then join together to become the seven soldiers of victory. And in fact, a lot of the seven soldier stories work like that, where there's one overarching plot, but then each one goes on their individual adventure, and that's what's going to happen here. The Justice League and the Justice Society are going to team up to try to find where the different members of the seven soldiers have gone. And I'm very sad to say that they didn't send modern Green Arrow to go after Golden Age Green Arrow. But what do you expect? Now, Wonder Woman, Dr. Midnight, and I should say Justice Society, Wonder Woman, Dr. Midnight, and Hawkman do find Green Arrow, who is, as always, pretending to be Robin Hood until the real Robin Hood shows up. And each one of the seven soldiers is in a different area, and some of them can't remember who they are, or they're confused as to why they've been kind of set aside. And it's up to the members of Justice Society and Justice League in order to bring them back and tell them what's going on. Diana Prince has stayed behind to coordinate between the different teams, but she gets captured by the Iron Hand. Green Arrow, Black Canary, and Johnny Thunder, who's a really interesting Justice Society character that we should talk more about at some point, are responsible for bringing back the Vigilante, and they fail miserably, but they actually eventually they get him there. And again, I really am fascinated by the genie and how that whole process works. And I'd love to do a deeper dive on that at some point, because I think it is interesting. But eventually, all the teams work together, bring back all of the seven soldiers, and the Oracle, once they've completed their mission, brings them back to the headquarters. So now everybody is going to be back. Again, some of them in different states of mind than others. In particular, I really like what they did with Speedy, where they turned him into a centaur. And he was doubly confused because what's going on with me? And then also, why was I a centaur for so long? But eventually, they bring back, and all of the seven soldiers are there. So now everybody's confused. Well, if we have all the seven soldiers, who's buried in the tomb? And that's an interesting answer. And I love this shot here of the Justice League, Justice Society, and all of the seven soldiers together. And again, they're wondering, hey, who's buried in the tomb? And the answer is Wing. Wing sacrificed himself in order to defeat the Nebula. And so he's the one who's buried in the tomb. So now Iron Hand shows up again with Diana Prince as his prisoner, threatening to hurt her if they don't stop trying to defeat him. But even without all of her powers, Diana Prince can still kick this guy's butt, and he does. So now they have the Nebula Rod, and it must be delivered by hand to the fist that's holding the Earth. No human can do it, and Superman can't do it because it's magic. So that leaves the Red Tornado, who sacrifices himself in order to save Earth 2. And we get this really nice moment between the Crimson Avenger and the JSA mourning over their lost colleagues, and how much that means, especially Red Tornado, even though he wasn't a human, he was still important to them. So that is issues 100 through 102 of the Justice League, and the team up between the Justice League, Justice Society, and the Seven Soldiers of Victory. As always, thank you so much for watching, listening, and remember, subscribe, help us beat Dynamite Comics. Thanks again, and as always, keep reading comics.